Yeah, it's a really interesting time because I think we are truly at an inflection point in the industry, and the companies that get it will survive and do well. The ones that don't will effectively be making the decision to sunset their business. It is all about the data. I mean, it sounds trite, and everyone's saying data is the new oil, but it is.
Hi, welcome back to the Manufacturing Come Up. I'm your host, Malachi Greb. Today, we have an awesome guest, somebody who's been operating the company for many, many years, and his name is Harald Horgen. He's with the York Group. Hi, how's it going?
Good, Malachi. We got it finally started. So sorry about the little hiccup before we got things set up.
No problem, no problem. So, you've been doing a ton with your career. You operated a company for, has it been like 30 years now?
Yeah, yeah.
That's wild.
It's been a long ride. Yeah.
I think we're gonna have a lot to learn from you today.
Yeah. Yeah, like a lot of careers, it wasn't a straight line. So,
Right.
yeah, been through a lot of things.
So I guess if you wouldn't mind, kind of taking us back to the beginning before you became a business owner, what exactly kind of pushed you to go down that road?
Well, to go back to the beginning, I'm actually from Norway originally,
Okay.
and moved to the U.S., moved to Arizona to complete an MBA at Arizona State University. So
Nice.
go Sun Devils, and then started my career in bank and finance. And
Okay.
then decided to go out on my own. I loved banking, but I didn't particularly like working for a bank. And so went on my own, and I started doing work with some very large companies based in Arizona around international franchising and setting up their franchise operations in different parts of the world. And one of those companies was a company called Microage, and they were one of the original franchise organizations for computer stores. And I set up a master franchise agreement for them with a Norwegian company to cover the Nordic region. And then at the same time, they signed an agreement with a French company as a joint venture to cover the rest of Europe. And they needed someone to do the business development. And I didn't have a technology background, just a business background, but I was kind of tired of living in Phoenix. It's very hot there, and for someone from Norway, it got a little bit too warm during the summers when it hit 122. So I volunteered to move to Paris for what was going to be a year to do the European business development for this JV, and just fell in love with living in France. We did the gig for a year and a half, it stretched out to a year and a half, and it gave me a lot of contacts in the IT community around Europe. So I
Mm.
thought, well, why not do that as a business? Let's work with software companies from the US that were expanding. So this was into the middle to the end of the 90s, as we were charging headlong into the bust. But it was a great time to be setting up operations for US companies. And so we did that, and we ended up with a real strong network of people. We had some very early successes worldwide, and we ended up with a network of people, subcontractors and independent contractors around the world to do the channel development for these companies.
Mm.
And so we became very good at business development and channel development for enterprise software companies. And with my background in finance, I take a very process driven approach to things, and we documented the things we were doing, documented the things that worked, documented all of the things that didn't work, and had a methodology. And then 2006, Microsoft found us. Microsoft tends to be process driven as well. They liked the fact that we had all of this IP and this content, and they brought us in to provide initially content for their partner program to help the software vendors that were building on the Microsoft technology stack to grow their business internationally through other Microsoft partners.
Mm.
And then we got to what 2010, 2012, and there was a really big push to take companies into the cloud. So Microsoft wanted all of their on-premise perpetual ISVs to their software vendors to move their application to Azure. And what they found was that the biggest blocker was not the technology, because these were all technology companies. They had engineers. They
Yeah.
understood what it was, but what they were lacking was an understanding of the impact on their business. So what happened when they stopped selling perpetual licenses with on-prem software to cloud-based applications and subscriptions? Fundamental change to their business, and they didn't understand the impact. So we started providing consulting services around, well, this is how you set up your company. Here's the profile of the salespeople you need. Here's the compensation model. Here's the pricing models for these types of subscriptions as opposed to perpetual licenses. How does your marketing change? How does your organizational structure need to change? And we did that for a couple of years and again, build out a really strong process around that. And then one of the program sponsors from Microsoft from that program moved over to their global ISV team. Those were the very large ISVs, companies like Symantec, CA, and then for whatever reason, a lot of large industrial companies that had software. So ABB had a big industrial software team. Schneider Electric had a they had Wonderware. They had bought a lot of companies, Aviva. And so they had a big industrial software team. Boeing, Lufthansa, Ericsson. And so I started working with those. And initially I was really concerned because our target market is really small to mid-sized companies.
Mm.
And when they asked me to go and work with these big globals, I said, and the lady was her name was Yvonne, great person over at Microsoft. And I said, Yvonne, we work with smaller companies, and I'm going to go in there with my little PowerPoint deck and my process, and these guys are going to laugh me out of the room. These are big, sophisticated companies. And she said, no, this is new to everybody, and they don't understand what the impact is on their organization. So we did this, and it turned out that she was right. They didn't know what they were doing. It was a clean sheet of paper for everybody. So I ended up specializing for some reason around industrial software companies that were making that transition, moving their software, their customers, and their organization from selling these big, heavy on-premise applications on a perpetual license to cloud-based subscriptions. And then
Mm.
that morphed into IoT. So about 5, 6 years ago, the IoT team at Microsoft came to me and said, we're now doing the same thing with manufacturers, and they have the same issue. The difference being that they don't even have a software team. But what they're doing is they're attaching sensors to their devices, they're collecting data, and then we help them build some baseline applications around condition monitoring, remote monitoring, preventive maintenance, and all of a sudden they have a software product that they're going to sell for $29 or 29 euros per connected device. They throw that over the wall to their salespeople, and the salespeople say, what am I supposed to do with this? And I'm selling a 300,000 euro piece of equipment or a $20,000 compressor or pump or whatever it is. And they don't understand, and they don't want to understand how to sell this subscription-based software. And
Mm.
so it was exactly the same dynamics that we had with these big industrial software companies, but now we had to work with the manufacturers on, well, what's your go-to-market? How do you set this up? Can you use the same salespeople? Is it the same customer that you're selling to? Is it a different target market? What are the pricing models? How do you need to restructure your marketing? And so I've worked with 40 or 50 major manufacturers around the world around now the business model and the go-to-market strategy for their connected devices.
You've had a heck of a career that's taken you down some different paths for sure. As far as now you're in the manufacturing sector,
Yeah.
and it seems like you're doing well in that sector as well. What what are some of the things that you're seeing with being one of the pushbacks for companies wanting to use IIoT?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time because I think we are truly at an inflection point in the industry, and the companies that get it will survive and do well. The ones that don't will effectively be making the decision to sunset their business. It is all about the data. I mean, it sounds trite, and everyone's saying data is the new oil, but it is. And the companies that don't have a really strong strategy around how to monetize, first of all, collect the data from their own devices and monetize that data, are ultimately going to become marginalized as simply suppliers of hardware at the lowest possible price. So it's a really tough time for manufacturers because the ones that get it, and I can talk about some examples of companies that really get it and are executing on a 10-year strategy and a vision. They have to make an investment today in a market that is relatively slow to adopt those solutions. There's quite a bit of pushback from their customers. So these are manufacturers that very often are selling to other manufacturers, and their customers are pushing back for a number of reasons. The number one pushback is, well, we don't want to share our data. We don't want our data from our equipment going into the cloud. That's one pushback. And the second pushback is they don't want to understand or learn how to use software. That's one of the biggest issues is that you're not coming in and you're coming back with a dashboard, and then you have to connect the devices to a gateway to get to the internet. You have to transfer the data, And it's for the guys that are on the shop floor, they don't want to know software. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that companies have to overcome is the resistance from their own employees. But the companies that don't, so the real risk for manufacturers, excuse me, as we move towards really connected devices and the value that the connected devices and the data can provide, is that someone else comes in and connects their devices. So in some of the content that I've written, I talk about using a compressor company as an example. So now you're a compressor company and you get it, and you connect your devices, you make them smart, and you install those, and then you go to your customer and say, please, Mr. Customer, give us access to your data, because once we get enough data, we'll apply some machine learning and some artificial intelligence, and we'll come back with some really cool applications. Well, for some of those customers, they say, well, what are you going to do for me today? Why do I have to provide this now? What's the benefit? Why should I bother to turn these devices on? But if the manufacturers don't, then someone else is going to do it. So now you're a compressor manufacturer, and in a lot of the production environments, it's a hybrid equipment market where companies have gone through different procurement cycles, different price points on different people and different loyalties. So over a 20-year period, they may have compressors from 3 or 4 different manufacturers.
Yeah.
And so manufacturer number one, who's ahead of the curve, they go in and say, we're now going to provide connected devices. We're going to monitor our stuff. And the customer says, well, what about our other stuff? Who's going to connect those? Why should we only have a small part of our production line being monitored? So the company that goes in and can say, we can connect the other compressors as well, and we'll provide that single pane of glass, they marginalize their competition because they're now collecting data from the entire group of installed devices. They're getting intelligence on their competitors' equipment. There's actually there's cases going on in Europe right now, anti-competition, for that very reason, where companies are saying, well, it's not fair that our competitor has access to the inner workings of our equipment that gives them a competitive advantage. And so there are a certain number of legal issues, but the company that gets it, they will ultimately control the data from all of the compressors and be able to go back to their customers with a solution that solves all of those problems.
One thing that's huge for companies that are building like a product, they're able to collect data and find out like what model of their air compressor is operating, lasting the longest, has like the least amount of downtime, like, and they can start identifying things, or if they start to have a failure in something, why are we having a failure in this one? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, we switched to using this bearing on that model, or during that year. And then you can identify this issue. Oh, maybe we shouldn't use that bearing anymore because it's causing a failure to our systems into the future.
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of things that they can discover. One of them is just user behavior. User behavior can have a real impact on the life of a piece of equipment,
Mm-hmm.
or whether there are consumables. ESAB is a great company from Sweden. They do robotic welding, and so they sell their robotic welding equipment. But one of the biggest variable costs for the customer is the filler metal and the amount of filler metal they use to actually do the soldering.
Yep.
And the amount of filler metal can vary by 20 to 30% depending on how careful or sloppy the operator is. And now you can start measuring that and say, well, operator A is using 20% less than operator B. And you can
Mm-hmm.
start going back with those types of recommendations. ESAB is actually looking at 10 years down the road to overcome this software barrier. They recognize that ultimately they need to be a managed service where they're providing welding as a service and potentially even outcome-based pricing. But where they go back to their customers, say, we will provide everything. Here's the welding equipment. We'll manage the filler material, and we will do the services, and it's all part of this monthly or quarterly or annual contract. You don't have to worry about anything. And that's ultimately where a lot of these companies are going to go.
I think it's definitely a business model that has the opportunity to be very, very fruitful. It's every sector of business. There's always a taste for the different flavors, right? Like, and so like this more subscription based style systems is something that uh, people are gonna want, right? They're not gonna want to add that to their capital expenditure.
Yes and no. It's funny because there are. especially in manufacturing, there's still a very much of a own not rent
Yeah.
mentality.
Yeah.
And so one of the business model objections is exactly that, that there are a lot of companies that are uncomfortable not owning and having to pay on a monthly basis. So we're going through more and more companies do see the benefit of OpEx, and they
Mhm.
see the benefit of handing over the responsibility for the outcome to the vendor.
Yeah.
And in the process, they should be reducing their operating costs. Another example is a US company called Donaldson. Donaldson they do industrial filtration. So they're about a $3 billion company, and their main product is a dust collector. A dust collector is a sheet metal structure, can be 3 stories tall. At the top of it is filled with filters, and they pull air in from the production environment. And
Mhm.
then each production environment, manufacturing plant, has different levels of sensitivity to the dust particulates per million. But depending on, if you're in a clean room, it's really, really tight. If you're in a sawmill, maybe not so much of a concern.
Mhm.
But based on that, then they pull the dust out, and they can measure the amount of dust that's left in the facility. And they looked at it, and the business is a razor blade business around the replacement filters.
Mhm.
And they found out there were three main factors that determine the useful life or the remaining life of a filter. It's heat, the temperature, it's the humidity, but most important, the amount of air that's pushed out of the compressors into the filter.
Mhm.
So you've got the filters at the top, they collect the dust, the air compressor pushes air into the filter, dislodges the dust, falls to the bottom of the structure. There's a drawer, they pull it out, that's the dust collector. Really simple technology. But if you miscalibrate the amount of air pressure, if it's not enough air pressure, the filters clog up with dust prematurely. If it's too much air, then it breaks down the membranes, and you're destroying the usefulness of the filter.
Mhm.
So they went in and they attached sensors that can measure all of these things now. And now they can manage and monitor the exact amount of pressure, the optimal amount of pressure that goes into the filters. Now, they're doing this as a managed service, and but their whole half the revenues are from replacement filters, and so now it's a completely different business model.
Yeah.
And the guys that are selling replacement parts are saying, "Excuse me, we would like to see these filters turn over as quickly as possible." Whereas the managed services group are saying, "No, we want to extend the life because now we're responsible for the total cost of ownership of those filters." But
Mhm.
uh, but they're doing it very well, and it's a great example of a company that has gone from more the traditional, we'll deliver the product, we'll do the maintenance service, and we'll come and do the replacement of those parts, to providing it all as a managed service.
I do want to kind of take a step back and find out like where did all this come from? Like what like gave you the ability to take all these leaps and navigate from having like a financial role into doing all these things in industry?
Well, I think it's because of my finance background. I look at it from a financial perspective, not a technical perspective. So when I go into the situation, I want to solve a business problem. And so I never get involved in the technology discussion of, which gateways are they using, which protocols, what devices, edge devices, how much are they moving here and there.
Mhm.
My job is to come in and look at this from a business perspective, and look at how do they solve the problem of getting into the hands of the customers. It's a business issue. And a lot of times the manufacturers are still very engineering focused, the
Mhm.
technology focused, and then what they do is they collaborate with a Microsoft or a Google or an AWS and all the technology geeks from there. And when you get the technology geeks together, the Microsoft and AWS geeks say, "Wow, wouldn't this be a great use case?" And the engineers on the manufacturer are like, "Yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's develop that." They do a POC without really understanding, is there a market? And if we build it, are we going to be able to sell it? So I think the fact that I do have a finance background puts me in a position to help solve that problem. And having done so much work with between the global software companies and the industrial manufacturers, I've done 70 or 80 of these engagements. It's given me a really broad view of what's happening in the marketplace, who's up front in this, who's lagging, why, and what the adoption rates are and what the business issues are that the manufacturers have to overcome in order to hopefully accelerate the rate of adoption of their technologies.
Yeah, it's definitely a big gap in like our industry as far as like you have the side where it's engineering, it's technical, and then you have the side that's business, and a lot of times those are two completely different teams. A lot of times it's your people on the shop floor, it's your let's say automation engineer or your manufacturing engineer, and that same person is not necessarily like the executive that actually cares about the ROI of systems and the uh, process improvements and just more of the business aspects of the different technologies and investments.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good observation, Malachi, because that is one of the things that companies run into is that so you have these manufacturers that might be doing $5 or $10 billion in revenues of their core business, and then they build out. They might invest two, three, five, $10 million in this new technology, and they try to bolt that onto their existing business structure, and it doesn't work because and the point that you made around in manufacturing, these roles tend to be more siloed. When you move into especially SaaS products, all of these roles are integrated and linked. So you need to have product development linked to sales and marketing. You need to have sales and marketing linked to customer support. Customer support needs to be integrated with the product development. It becomes a continuous feedback loop. And that's a different way of thinking about the organization. And that's why for most companies that try to just bolt on this new um, this connected devices solution onto their existing organization, it's not going to succeed. The ones that are doing it well typically set up a separate structure, a digital solutions group, for example, where they have people that are specialized in that. They may still leverage all of the core resources the company has. They'll leverage the key account managers, but they won't expect the key account managers to lead the charge and sell the solution. They might have specialized inside salespeople and customer success managers that really understand the SaaS solution and how you sell and support a SaaS solution. Same thing with customer support. On the product side, you have engineers sitting there ready to get their hands dirty, fixing a problem for their customer. And those people can't sit there and answer a question from an end user saying, well, how do I change this field from yellow to green? It's a different role. It's a different way to support the customers. So yes, it's a great question, a great observation. And the ones and I had this conversation with Luke Smau from Momenta, and we were talking about that, and we came to an agreement that yeah, in the incubation phase, this needs to be a separate organization. Ultimately, you bring this back in, but only when it's achieved a critical mass, and you have a successful business model, and some of the DNA of that organization has bled over to the manufacturing side.
What are your thoughts around the fact that like these departments are more segregated? Do you think that into the future we'll go to more business models where they're like this SaaS style business model where things have to be more in a feedback loop?
I think so. I mean, I think we're already starting to see on the manufacturing side the whole concept of agile. That's the cornerstone of development for SaaS solution, where you put together scrums and you have the teams and you build like a feature at a time rather than an end-to-end monolithic solution. And I think we're starting to see some of that as more and more technology is incorporated into the hardware. And hardware ultimately is not going to be the value driver. Hardware becomes a delivery mechanism to collect the data. And in more and more cases, we're seeing the hardware become the edge device where they're transferring some of the compute and the analytics to the device. A company that's done this really well is DMG Mori, the German-Japanese joint venture, and they sell machine tools. And machine tools can be 200, 300,000 euros. So really, really sizable pieces of equipment. And they've built an entire operating system that's incorporated into the machine tool. And then on top of that operating system, they have a portfolio of specific applications built on top of that. So now you're seeing this hybrid. It's not just machine tools anymore, but machine tool with the software, it becomes a hybrid device and becomes the edge where a lot of the compute and a lot of the value can be driven from the hardware itself.
Yeah, I think that we definitely will see more of the business models being in a more close loop. There, I think a lot of large companies, a big thing that happens is you create your different departments, and things as you grow, they kind of get segregated out so much that there's some guys at the top that try to guide what's going on down here, but the people down here really are not in relation with what's going on up here. And I think that the data and the IoT things are going to uh, help close that gap, because now we're finally, now there's gonna be like a new layer of like positions, right? There's gonna be
Mhm.
job titles that are opening up for individuals who are in charge of this, collecting this data, implementing this data, and whole entire teams wrapped around, like you said, having like a separate, complete business entity that you migrate into your company.
Yeah, no, no, I think you're right. In both in traditional manufacturing and traditional software, very siloed roles. So you would have product development would come up with this great idea and build the product. They throw that over the wall to marketing. Marketing was responsible for generating the leads for this fantastic new solution. The leads would come in, they would throw that over the wall to the salespeople. Salespeople would follow their track and close the deal. And then when they were done, they would throw it over the wall to customer support.
Mm-hmm.
And those walls have to break down, have to come down. And the more and more technology that's incorporated with the devices, the more important it is for these other roles to be involved in the design of the product up front, so that it is easier to sell, it's easier to support, it has a clearer value proposition. So it's going to require much more collaboration between these teams. In today's environment, it's tough enough for an organization to get sales and marketing to work together. And it's a really big challenge if they're trying to change the DNA of their organization to get their existing teams to move down this collaborative path. That's why very often they find it necessary and desirable to, no, let's set up a separate group where the people that come in have that collaboration as their DNA. And then we can start benefiting from the best practices and bringing that into the rest of the organization. Because at this stage, I mean, the IoT stuff is, it's not even the tail wagging the dog. For many companies right now, it's the flea wagging the tail, wagging the dog. But it's the future. And so for a lot of companies, it's very hard to justify, well, why should we invest in setting up a corporate structure and investing $5 or $10 million in developing this technology if it doesn't impact our sales this quarter or next quarter? And there's no clear time horizon. When you're building a new piece of equipment, you can model it out and you can say, here's our version 3.0 is our brand new,
Mm-hmm.
and they know pretty much what the adoption is going to be, what the upgrade cycle is going to be, and they can map out what the revenue projections are to justify the investment and the ROI that they need. But with the IoT side, because the adoption has been so bumpy, there's a certain leap of faith that a company has to make that investment with the expectation that it's going to pay off at some point. But they can't sit down and have a cost plus and say, well, if we invest 5 million in this and we need to make a 15% margin, how do we? It's a completely wrong approach for
Mm-hmm.
the new generation of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for like smaller companies that are looking to implement, like one thing they could try to do is find areas where they can add smart devices, and there be some type of way to get an immediate ROI. Maybe you're going to try to optimize line speeds. Maybe you're going to try to optimize downtime, and this could be a combination of all these things. But you're trying to find some optimization to reach an ROI to make that initial investment.
No, absolutely. That's for the internal use and process improvement. And absolutely agree with you there that companies of any size should be incorporating those new technologies for their internal use. Where I've been going is companies that are developing these solutions to sell to those companies and the
Gotcha.
business model to sell those. But for so there should, but the rate of adoption by companies for the internal use obviously impacts the sales likelihood of success for the companies manufacturing them. So someone has to do that. We see this on LinkedIn. A lot of the content is around education, training, culture,
Mhm.
and so who's going to do that? To a certain extent, it's the responsibility now of the manufacturer with the connected devices to explain and educate their customers on the use cases and why they should be doing it.
Yeah, I think that, like, say for instance, like a company like ours, like we have the opportunity because we're system integrators, right? So we're deploying robotic systems, and we have the opportunity to add features onto our devices. Like one of the big ones that we shoot for is remote support, right?
Hmm.
So we try to make it so that either every single device has some type of like web interface that we can access remotely, and if there's not, then we're putting a PC onto the system, so that way we
Right.
have the capability of being able to log in and do changes. And it's a little bit different, right? It's not just purely data collection, but as a product provider, us being like a robotic system, uh, we see the value in like adding these smart devices, and then going back into like the remote side of things. uh, Majority of these smart devices, you can log into them and you can get error messages, and so that
Mhm.
gives us even more capability on the remote side of things. And
So you
but
you and I see this from the delivery standpoint. We understand the benefits. So you're kind of at the cold face, now selling this to your customers. What's the biggest pushback that you get from companies when you're saying you could really add a lot of value with this additional intelligence built into your current production process?
yeah, the biggest thing is them spending the extra money. This is going to be $40,000 extra dollars to add these pieces of equipment that are smarter devices, have Ethernet IP, these different functionalities. And to be honest, like on anything that gives us like a very good ROI, half time we implement them anyway because we really feel that they're that valuable that we just
Gotcha.
eat the cost. Like we try to get the customer to pay for them, and then if they don't, then we're going to use it anyway. Probably, hopefully, our
Yeah.
customers aren't listening right now. They're going to negotiate with us.
But and that's a really good point because that's one of the discussion points I have with a lot of my clients is because they have this again manufacturer mentality and it's all cost plus. They say, well, if we're going to add connectivity to our devices, that's going to add $89 or $189 in costs. We should be having our customers pay for that. Well, if the customers aren't inclined to install and use connected devices, you can't do that.
Mhm.
And as a manufacturer, the number one priority is to get an install base, whether or not the customers are turning it on and connecting, is getting your connected devices out there. Because once you have the install base, that's when you go back and send in your specialized salespeople on convincing the customer that it's worthwhile for them to now connect the devices. The customers won't even know or care that they've got installed these connected devices. But the challenge then is show them the value, show them the ROI, and give them a good enough reason to connect and start sharing that data.
Yeah, absolutely. And even there's some instances too where just like the devices themselves, like can give you more feedback on the manufacturing floor, where if they won't allow you to connect to the internet, at least it's there. You can collect the data in the PLC, you can connect it or collect it in the PLC, you can export as like CSV files, so at least it's there. And so maybe that's something that we do as like a sales tactic. Like, sure, the data's here, we're doing a lot of monitoring of things behind the scenes, but if the customer wants it and they want to pay for it, then they have access to it. If they don't, then they don't have
Yeah,
access to it,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I absolutely agree. And for a lot of end user customers, that will be the first baby step. And because many of them are going to have a historian, they're going to have OSI Soft or Viva. They're going to have historical data,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can go back and say, well, we've got 20 years of data, so let's just analyze the historical data. We don't have to move anything to the cloud, but we'll look at the historical data because we can do a lot in terms of looking at what are the characteristics of that determine the useful life, and come back with recommendations based on the historical data. It doesn't necessarily have to be a real-time connection. There will be additional value add when you go live and have that real-time connection. But there's a lot that can be done with historical data. And for a lot of the customers that are reluctant to share data, they don't understand the internet connectivity, they can still get a lot of that value.
One thing that I see as being a big one in like robotics and automated pieces of equipment is identifying like where like a issue occurred. Right. Let's say for especially like a critical issue, like a robot crashes into something. Like you need to be able to identify like why that happened, and ensure that it never happens.
Right.
Can you identify that an operator grabbed the teach pin and moved the robot, and then they press the play button from after maintenance came and moved the robot or something.
Yeah.
um, and also too for like somebody who's a machine builder, that could be good on your part, because if ever the customer says, hey, this machine crashed, and it's because of you guys' programming, you guys can go back and you can look at the data. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
an argument. You can go clearly look at it and say, okay, we have a discrepancy. The data says this is where the robot was. It was moved, and then
Mhm.
somebody hit the start button. So by being able to put these type of things in place, it makes it easier to be able to identify and avoid future mistakes.
Yeah, no, 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 absolutely. Um, it's it's going to be fascinating. A lot of the companies that I've worked with have been in business for 120 to 150 years. And really, what they do over the next 5 years is going to determine their viability long term as a manufacturer. And some of the companies get it, many don't. And the ones that don't are going to wake up one day. There's a huge amount of investment that's happening, what I call under the water surface, that isn't visible yet. The companies that I've worked with that haven't actually released their IoT portfolio, the connected devices, but that have been investing over the last 2 or 3 years to bring the technology to the level it needs to be. And now looking at the organizational aspects and the go-to-market. And when they come to market, they're going to be competitors that all of a sudden wake up and realize, oh my God, we are a generation or two behind where the market is going, and they're going to find themselves in a really difficult position because they won't have the resources to ramp up quickly enough. And then what do? Do they buy that from? They bring in a Cognite or Tulip or they bring in a systems integrator. How do they try and catch up and make their equipment intelligent and competitive before the companies that are out there today take their market share away from them?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
we're going to see, I think, a lot of consolidation in the manufacturing space, driven by Industry 4.0.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I even see there's a gap. I kind of look at it a gap between automation and there's a gap between IoT. I mean, there's some companies who are not even hitting the automation phase yet,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's really the biggest reason why I haven't talked a lot about IoT type of things is because there's so many customers that are still behind in trying to get automated, like
yeah.
100%. Like if they don't catch up on the automation side of things,
I
that
know.
there's just so many manufacturing processes that are just so far behind that I don't. They have to basically restructure their entire company.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's still a long ways to go on the OT side of it.
What are some of the other challenges that you see with companies implementing IoT?
It's the organizational culture and the pushback. I mean, you look at the demographics of the
Mhm.
people that are running and working in these companies, and so the a lot of these companies will have a tough time attracting the right talent that have the skills necessary. So you're sitting there as a manufacturer and you're at the middle of nowhere in Eastern Germany or in Ohio, and you've realized that you need to go down this road, and you've been collecting data and you've got enough, but now you need a data scientist to come in and start making some sense out of all this data. You need some programmers, and you're sitting there in the middle of Ohio, Indiana, Minnesota. How do you attract the really good people? And if you don't attract the right people, then you can't actually build out the technology and then the organizational changes. And it's a really big issue for companies when you have, and very traditionally you have 10,000, 20,000 employees that have been doing the same kind of business, same process for the last 20, 30 years. And
Mhm.
then I come in with this little digital services team that really gets where you need to go and is trying to change the behavior of the other 20,000. And there's a huge disconnect. That I think is probably the number one challenge within companies, even the ones that absolutely get it. There are very few examples of companies that have successfully made that transformation. There will be over the next few years, but on the hardware manufacturing or even the industrial software side, it's been very difficult. The organizations that have been able to change completely are the two that come to mind are Adobe and Microsoft, but it was brute force, top down. They were going to change the organization and focus on subscription model services, and that was the only thing that counted. And but at a terrible cost of attrition, because it was if you can't adjust, you're gone. Now, when you're a manufacturing company, you can't do that because you have all that institutional knowledge that's necessary for the manufacturing side and the sales and support of that equipment.
Mhm.
And so it's a much tougher process for a company coming at it from manufacturing to start making the changes to the organization and the culture that set them up for that long-term success.
So I want to take a little bit of a shift to the conversation. What are some of the things that you found have made you successful throughout your career?
The one thing is that I've got a broad background, and so it also, since I'm not just coming at it from a technology perspective or where I just come out of digital marketing or a very specific area, it's helped me um, sit down with companies and understand the end-to-end process that they're going through, and make those and help them make those adjustments. So I think maybe just having a broader view, that's one. The second is that for whatever reason, I feel comfortable in facilitating conversations. A lot of these engagements are really just around aligning the management, where management comes in some organizations, you have a lot of very strong and opposing views. And being able to sit down and work with a team from manufacturing, from product management, from sales and support, and having them align around an action plan and working together to accomplish whatever it is that they come out of there as an agreement. And it may not be as aggressive as the digital group wanted, but it might be a little bit more aggressive than the manufacturing side we're comfortable with, but where they have an understanding of why they need to do it and how they're going to work together on that. Um, when it comes to business models, business is business. There's processes for every part of the business model, and but it's how do you apply that to a specific organization and a culture and what their overall objectives are. So you can't go in with a connect the dots and paint by numbers where you take every company through exactly the same process and have a lot of companies use the business model canvas, which was just a very programmatic approach to you spend an hour and a half on the value proposition, then you look at the sales and look at the customers and partners and resources, and you work your way through that. But it's a very structured, rigid process that you take them through. And where I think in large part because I've done so many of them now, I feel really comfortable sitting down with a team and just facilitating the conversation, identifying what the real pain points are, which they don't always know. Those surface and then have those resolved so they can work together more collaboratively to achieve whatever their objectives are.
Do you feel like you've always been a fairly good salesperson, or did that kind of come throughout your
Yeah, I
journey?
don't consider myself a salesperson.
Gotcha.
But I think it's part of it. My approach is always, and you brought this up earlier, is problem resolution. When you're going in as a systems integrator, you're helping your customer solve the problem. You have to understand what the problem is, and then help them solve it. And if you can do that, then yeah, you can call that a sales approach. But it's not where you're going in and saying, "This is my packaged product, and I want you to buy it, and here are the three benefits." And you start at the other end of understanding what their issues are, what they
Yeah,
need to resolve, and then coming to them with the customized solution.
absolutely. And it's like it's going through a very large identification phase. So you gotta go through and see all the inputs, all the variables, and then take those variables, analyze them, and come up with whatever the proper solution is.
That's right, and understanding how those variables fit together,
Yes.
and seeing that picture. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being a problem solver definitely makes it the easier process or the process easier. Um, I find it very hard. Like we don't really work in a space where you're really you like you said a salesperson, right? It's just it's adding value. It's figuring out people's problems and then resolving those problems.
Yeah, and that's the more modern approach to selling is consultative selling. And people will say, well, if you're going in and helping resolve problems, you're also selling in a better way. But it really is what the customer needs and customizing the process and the outcome for what their needs are, rather than trying to push them into something that might be more programmatic.
Hmm. What what are some things that you advise for individuals navigating their career?
Oh, don't plan anything. don't don't have a kind of a 20-year plan of what just go with it. You figure out what you're good at and be open to new opportunities, and we see this in a lot of technology companies. A lot of the people that do best are not the technologists; they're the people that have a liberal arts education, and so. As people are moving to the careers, be open to new things. And I mean, the phrase that is often used is build a talent stack. If you end up being really focused in one area, then you're at risk. You might become a very deep dive specialist in that one area, but that's all you're good at. And if the world changes, or if there's no need for that any longer, and we've seen a lot of roles that just disappeared over the last 10 years, then you're out. So I would say more methodically try different things for the first 5 to 10 years, and get a broad base of experience. It just provides a much stronger foundation for making the right decision for you, but also being able to see a bigger picture when you're
Mhm.
going into a business environment.
Yeah, that was one of the main things that I kind of take away is that by doing more things, you're able to get a bigger picture, right? You're able to uh, see things in a different way that you couldn't see if you're just stuck in doing this one thing.
Yeah,
Like there's been a lot. So like say for instance, like majority of my career, I've been in system integration. So like the lucky part to that is like I'm constantly going into different manufacturing facilities throughout my career and working on different type of systems and working on different issues. So it's like my entire career, there's been things that are different, right? Even though it's all been in automation and manufacturing, it's still like being able to witness so many different manufacturing processes, work with so many different people, um, and just
but
going through all those different phases, and then becoming a business owner. There's a whole new realm of things that you have to learn. I mean, like I primarily did a lot of like engineering, project management, and now it's like I'm having to go through and learn more about like finance, and I understand how to scale a business, but you know, doing things like setting budgets to things and more business relationship type of stuff, like sales processes. Like we've pretty much had to create our sales process from scratch from a guy that never was really involved in sales, right? And we're just now kind of getting to a point where our sales team is like really built out and is actually it's like a good full-fledged department.
yeah, but you can look at your career as, are you a product or are you a platform? The broader your experience, the more of a platform you become, and then the individual roles become the applications of the product. So sales is a product, but it sits on top of the platform of understanding how to run a business. And so the broader your experience, the stronger your platform, the more you can apply that in different scenarios.
Well, do you have any last valuable points you'd like to add to the community?
No, it's just a fascinating time. I would encourage people in the community to really use LinkedIn. It's amazing to me how much knowledge people are willing to share. The influencers and the thought leaders, how much information is there, and different perspectives and conversations. And it's a great way for manufacturers that are starting to think about it and need information, is to engage on LinkedIn and to see what's out there. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge that's available, and it'll help people make a better, more informed decision on what's right for them. And connected products is not going to be right for everybody. They don't have a big enough customer base. They don't have, so they just have to recognize that. The ones that will get into trouble are the ones that try to be too ambitious and don't have the foundation for being successful. But yet, it's really about understanding where the industry is going, where their particular company fits into the overall trend, and then having a realistic understanding of what they should be doing, what they could be doing.
And I think I like the fact that you're like touched on like LinkedIn and how it opens up so many doors. I think I just made a YouTube video about it like last week, but it's such a good tool. Like, I wish I would have done it and been on it, 5 years before I did. I didn't even think about getting on LinkedIn until I was, starting a business and was like, hey, this is a good way for me to, reach a community and potentially, sell to individuals and really just like build out my network because, leaving the company that I left, I pretty much left with no network. And if I would have been building the network that I've been doing the past 3 years, I mean, no telling, I wouldn't even probably need a sales team. I'd just
Yeah,
be
no,
connected with all the people.
but you're right, and it's amazing to me how much goodwill there is. How I was one of the first 25,000 users of LinkedIn. I think I registered in 2003.
Oh wow.
And it's amazing to me how they've been able to maintain the quality of people, the quality of discourse. You see some trends towards the Twitterization, if you will, of personal opinions, but for the most part, it's very professional.
Mhm.
And the amount of goodwill that people are, their willingness to share their experiences and their thoughts and their recommendations in both the chat part of LinkedIn, but also the specific industry groups and that you can. So it's a fantastic resource.
Absolutely. Where can people find you at?
Oh, website is www.theyorkgroup.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. Um, LinkedIn, I got H Horgen as the extension, so it's grandfathered in. So
Awesome.
those yeah, those are two. I'm on Twitter, but for personal, and so it for me it's LinkedIn is the only one, the only social media from a business perspective that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here with us today, Harold.
Malachi, this was great. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for being here.